Joining me right now for more on this is retired U.S. Army Major General Dana Pittard and CNN Global Affairs analyst Susan Glasser. She's a staff writer with The New Yorker. Susan, help people understand again why this meeting between Biden and the new German chancellor is so important when it comes to Ukraine and Russia in this moment.
Well, absolutely, Kate. First of all, Germany is the major player in Central Europe and in not only NATO, but the European Union has long been a key interlocutor with Russia. It's with the departure of Chancellor Angela Merkel. This is a huge trial by fire crisis for the new Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It's very significant. He's coming to meet with President Biden today. There have been long-standing disagreements with the United States over Nord Stream 2. The U.S., from Obama to Trump to Biden, has been opposed to this pipeline, but disagreeing over how much pressure to put on Germany about it. I think Putin's actions have made that just politically untenable here in Washington any further. And so I think what you're going to see is Olaf Scholz having to come to terms with that political reality. Jake Sullivan was clear on that. Tony Blinken has been clear on that. One way or the other means that the U.S. has already made up its mind about Nord Stream 2. So the question is, how are the Germans going to kind of make a face-saving acknowledgement of that reality?
And in general, the French president is now seeming to step into the role that for years was the role, position, and job of Angela Merkel. I mean, now he's face-to-face, sitting down with Vladimir Putin. With 100,000 Russian troops at the Ukraine border, what is the best outcome from that meeting, do you think?
Well, good morning, Kate. I think the fact that French President Macron is meeting with President Putin in Russia is a good thing, because I think dialogue and diplomacy can help to de-escalate the situation. You know, over 100,000 troops, and some say it's as many as 130,000 troops, are amassed along the Ukrainian border from Russia as well as Belarus. There's a good chance that Russia could attack. Could they take over all of Ukraine? The answer is no, not with that small of a force. But they could hit and take over limited objectives like the capital Kiev. So having that kind of a dialogue to help de-escalate, I think, is very, very important. And there's some things that can be done. I mean, Russia could accept a moratorium on Ukraine's membership into NATO. There could also be a multi-year discussion on stability in Europe between NATO, Russia, and the U.S., and also to upgrade and update the 1975 Helsinki agreements that could also help de-escalate the situation.
Also, General, the intelligence assessments that are being reported out, I think, are fascinating, important, and quite frankly, a little bit scary. The fact that U.S. officials are telling CNN that Putin has assembled, the way they describe it, is 70% of the forces that Russia would need to mount a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And everyone's still saying they don't know if Putin has made up his mind, what his real intention is. What do you make of this intelligence assessment?
Well, I think the intelligence assessment is based on capabilities. And certainly Russia and the Russian forces there have that capability. It's another thing, though, to actually do that. Having commanded a multinational brigade in Kosovo back in 2003, additional American forces had a Russian battalion, Polish, Ukrainian, Greek units. The Russian soldiers were tough, but the Ukrainian soldiers were fierce and disciplined. It will be easy to get into a war with Ukraine, but it'll be difficult to get out.
That is an important message today for sure. Susan, you talked about Jake Sullivan. I want to play for you how he, President's national security advisor, answered the question, is an invasion imminent? Listen.
We are in the window. Any day now, Russia could take military action against Ukraine, or it could be a couple of weeks from now, or Russia could choose to take the diplomatic path instead.
That sounds a little bit like three different answers that Jake's giving there. What is Sullivan trying to say?
Well, I think what he's saying and what the U.S. government has been communicating both publicly and privately right now is that the capabilities have been moved into position. And, you know, they are very much leaning into that, saying not only is there no de-escalation, but that essentially this is a full-scale invasion force. The recent assessment I heard suggests that, that they're having full capability for an invasion within a week and a half to 2 weeks, that they've moved to forward deployments, that, some of the troops who've been there already have actually moved to new field camps, that they're within maybe 30 kilometers of the border. So this is, going to play itself out in some ways, one way or the other. The hesitation there is because in this system in Russia, Putin remains the decider, which is why it's not entirely clear, probably even to members of the Russian military forces per your earlier reporting, and also why this meeting today with French President Macron is very interesting. There has not been a one-on-one meeting in person between Putin and a major Western leader like Macron throughout this crisis. So I think, will it be at a minimum some interesting intelligence that comes out of this on the part of the French as to what Putin is saying, what his mindset is right now. He's been very isolated. So I think that that's quite interesting and significant.
Yeah. In general, President Biden, he didn't answer a question yesterday of whether he's considering sending more U.S. troops to Eastern Europe. In light of this new intelligence assessment, I'm curious if you think more troops should be deployed before an invasion.
Well, certainly to bolster up NATO's eastern flank in countries like Romania and Poland and in the Baltic republics. I mean, I think that's just prudent. It helps to settle our NATO allies also. But let there be no doubt, there's a lot of pride in Ukraine. I was just in Ukraine a couple years ago, meeting with their Ministry of Defense and former President Yushchenko. They will fight for the country. And what bothers President Putin the most isn't just that Ukraine could be in NATO. It's the fact that Ukraine is democratizing. Now, it's a slow, it's imperfect, but Ukraine is forming, after 30 years of independence from the Soviet Union, their own national identity. And President Putin fears that as an autocrat.
General, it's always great to have you. Susan, thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Sure.